Bye. Oh non, t'as dû être trop de de ça. Ça c'est mieux. Faites ça.
Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our event tonight featuring our special guest, Marthe Cohn. I'd like to just begin by taking a moment to acknowledge the fact that we're on the land. We're gathering tonight on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional land of the Nehiyaw peoples and the homeland of the Métis Nation. As you can see, we have an amazing turnout here tonight, and I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you so much for braving the cold weather and coming out here tonight on a January evening. My name is Hannah Jodry. I'm a member of Saskatoon's Jewish community, and I'm very honored to be the MC here and the Q&A moderator for tonight's discussion and event. We're going to begin tonight's event with a brief video, followed by Marthe's incredible story. Following that, we're going to have a question and answer session. You can just see there's 4 stations set up around the salon here today. So I'd encourage you, if you have any questions, to please line up at one of the mics, and I will prompt you for your question after the story. After this, if you want to purchase a signed copy of Marthe's book, copies are available at the back, although I do believe they're selling very quickly. At this point, I'd like to remind you to please set your cell phones to silent, and so you don't inadvertently interrupt our guest. During the story, feel free to take pictures, but please keep in mind to turn off your flash. Now, this event would never have happened without the incredible work of Rabbi Raphael and Sarah Katz of the Chabad Jewish Center of Saskatoon. They arrived in Saskatoon in 2011 and have since worked tirelessly over these past 8 years, I guess, to invigorate the Saskatoon Jewish community here with celebrations and special events, and have, in the process, familiarized many non-Jewish community members with our faith and traditions as well. As many of us know, anti-Semitism is rising again in our communities across the world, but one of the best ways to combat this hatred and ignorance is through educating and familiarizing people with our traditions, and there are no people I know who have worked harder in this respect. They've worked for months to organize, promote, and arrange everything so that this once-in-a-lifetime event could occur. And without them, this evening would never have happened. So please, let's give a round of applause for Rabbi Rafi and Sarah Katz.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Welcome to Behind Enemy Lines, the true story of a French Jewish spy in Nazi Germany. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And it's absolutely amazing that so many people have come on a cold January evening from all over our province, not for a sporting event. Thank you. Not for a sporting event, not for a concert, but to interact with a woman who was a survivor and a heroine. As you'll hear, Marthe's courage and bravery resulted in World War II being shortened. She received France's highest military honors, which you'll have a chance to see after her talk. Her story is one of espionage, intrigue, heroism, serendipity, and divine design. And tonight we're going to learn about many things. We're going to learn about history. We're going to learn about the consequences of bigotry, of racism, of demonizing people, of anti-Semitism. But tonight we're also going to learn about the strength of the human spirit and its ability to overcome overwhelming odds. We're going to learn about a person's refusal to be a victim. We're also going to learn about the ability of just one person to make a difference, if only you have faith that you can. And we're also going to learn from Marthe's story that faced with war, some people tragically chose to allow their basest instincts to come to the fore, but also that some chose to allow the best parts of their being to express themselves, embodying their divine spark. It's always a choice that we make. Marthe Cohn was born in France in 1920, but she is one of the most youthful people I've had the privilege of meeting. Marthe and her husband Major are here with us tonight, who's here with us tonight as well, live in the warm climate of California, and we are so incredibly fortunate. We are so incredibly fortunate that they've agreed to accept our invitation and travel all the way to Saskatoon to share Marthe's incredible story. The fact that someone has lived this life and is able to reflect so many years later is truly remarkable, and we are so privileged to have the ability to hear from her and to meet her in person. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Marthe Cohn.
I would like first to thank Rabbi Katz and Mrs. Katz for having invited me to that event. And I want to thank all of you who have come so numerous to listen to my journey during World War II. We will first show you a DVD. In 2004, Mr. Richard Trank, the movie director of the Wiesenthal Center, which is a museum in Los Angeles where we live, came to my home and interviewed me for 5 hours. But be reassured, the DVD will last only 10 minutes. And
DVD was not
yeah,
made.
and that DVD was made in 2004 by not Mr. Richard Trank, but somebody else in the Wiesenthal Center. And my comments after the DVD, you will understand why I say that. So here is the DVD.
How does a young girl from a devoutly Orthodox Jewish family end up becoming a spy whose efforts helped to bring an earlier end to the war in Europe in 1945? The answer to that question was one that Marthe Cohn, born Marthe Hoffnung, kept to herself for the better part of a half-century. Born in 1920 in the French town of Metz in the Alsace region of France near the German border, Marthe was one of 7 children. The family was quite religious, but at the same time mixed easily with their non-Jewish neighbors. But with war clouds on the horizon in September of 1939, the Hoffnungs and many of their Jewish neighbors decided to move to a safer part of France, away from the German border, to the town of Poitiers, southwest of Paris. However, they were not safe for long. The Nazis invaded France, and with little resistance, the French government capitulated. Immediately, life began to change.
We didn't know how bad it would be. We could not understand that, because even if we knew about Kristallnacht, it was in Germany. They did that to the Germans. They couldn't do that to the French people.
For a while, in spite of the various restrictions placed on the Jews, the Hoffnungs were able to go about their daily business. Martha started nursing school and became engaged to a young medical student. As the war progressed and resistance to the Nazis and their Vichy French collaborators became more widespread, the family began to take more chances. Martha and her sisters hid Jews who did not have the proper papers, and her fiancé became actively involved in resistance activities. One day, French police arrested her sister Stephanie and then her father. When her father was released shortly thereafter, the family managed to escape using false papers that did not identify them as Jews. There was a plan to help Stephanie escape from the French jail she was being held at, but sadly, it failed.
She was caught in the camp, and then later she was transferred to Drancy near Paris, and then to Pithiviers. And she wrote that they were going to be deported that afternoon of Yom Kippur 42.
Most of the Hoffnung family went to the mountains to join an older brother who was head of the resistance there. Martha finished her nursing studies in Marseille, occasionally getting the chance to rendezvous with her fiancé Jacques. Then, in the summer of 1943, she went to Paris to work for a month in a hospital, traveling again under her false papers. She met briefly with Jacques. He was on the run for a resistance act that led to the murder of a Nazi collaborator. She begged him to stay in hiding with her.
And I told him, you cannot go back to Poitiers. You have immediately to escape and go south and go to Spain, and I will join you. But he said he has to go back. His family is in Poitiers. His brother is there. He will tell them goodbye and live with his brother and his friends as soon as they can. And he left after his examination. He left, and he promised me to write me every day. And 3 letters arrived. And the first one never came.
She soon learned that Jacques had been arrested along with his brother and several friends. He was tried and then executed for his resistance activities. Broken-hearted, Martha returned to Marseille, graduated from her nursing studies, and then moved back to Paris to work for a registry. She remained there until the Allies liberated France.
When we heard on the radio that the troops were entering Paris, all the church bells started ringing, and we opened our windows and we all sang the Marseillaise. The whole city was singing the Marseillaise.
Almost immediately after the liberation, Martha enlisted in the French army, where initially she worked as a social worker in the Alsace region of the country, close to her hometown of Metz. When her commanding officer learned that Martha spoke fluent German, he recruited her to join Army intelligence.
I was introduced to Colonel Bouvet. He told me he needs me to interrogate people, to know what's going on, to know how the strategy of the German, if they are retreating or not retreating, and how many people are there, all this military information.
After procuring information from Nazi POWs, Martha was ready for her spy mission. It involved crossing the border from Switzerland into Germany to see how entrenched the Nazis still were. She would then have to pass that intelligence on to the Allies. It took more than 13 tries, but Martha made it over the border into Germany. Her cover was that she was a German nurse trying to find out what happened to her Nazi fiancé. One day, she came upon a group of German soldiers who had retreated from the Allies.
And we were walking, and among us was a non-commissioned officer who was an SS, and he was raving about the Jews, how much he had killed Poles and Jews and all that. And he loved, and he smelled Jews a mile away. That's always what they say. He was going back to the Siegfried line. He had been wounded, and he came back from the hospital. And as we walked, he fainted. So I was a good German nurse. I took care of him.
From this SS soldier, Martha was able to obtain important information about exactly what was going on at the Nazi front lines. Making her way back to the Swiss border, she was able to transmit her report with the help of a Swiss farming family. Martha then crossed the border again and made her way back into Germany to see if there was anything else she could uncover.
I walked to the Siegfried line to see what's going on. And when I arrived at the Siegfried line, they were all gone. The last stragglers were leaving. And they told me that the Siegfried line is empty. Do you realize what an important information that was?
The information Martha uncovered helped to shorten the Allied effort to defeat the Nazis and saved untold numbers of lives. For the better part of a half-century, Martha did not talk of her experiences, even with her family. But in the mid-1990s, while visiting in France, she made a request for her French Army records. When officials at the French archives saw her file of commendations and achievements, the wheels were put into motion for her to be awarded the Médaille Militaire, one of France's highest military honors, and the same medal awarded to Sir Winston Churchill by the French government. Why was she so quiet about her exploits over the years?
It was not modesty, but I thought that nobody would believe me. You know, usually a spy is a very tall, good-looking woman, and I didn't feel I was that type of person at all. I was a very unlikely spy. I have some comments to make about the DVD. Like usually when I'm interviewed by the media, and if anybody of the media is here tonight, I do not intend to offend anybody. But anytime I am interviewed by the media, they never render things the way I tell them. And that has nothing to do with fake news. Yeah. Yeah. In the DVD, they pretend that I was born in Alsace. To my knowledge, my home city of Metz, M-E-T-Z, is in Lorraine and not in Alsace. Alsace-Lorraine are two provinces, but very different provinces, mostly for the language. In Alsace, they speak a German dialect. In Lorraine, that means mostly in the Moselle, the department of the Moselle, of which my hometown of Metz is the capital. We spoke mostly the High German, the real German, the Hochdeutsch. But I have to explain why. In 1970, the Kaiser Wilhelm I and his General Bismarck invaded France, and they went as far as the doors of Paris. They did not enter Paris like the Germans did in 1940. They laid siege to Paris, and the Parisians were starving. The French government wanted them to go back, but the Prussian army of Kaiser Wilhelm I demanded that France give to Prussia all of Alsace and the department of the Moselle, of which Metz is the capital. And the French government did that. They gave them all of Alsace and the Moselle, the department of Moselle. So during 1970 to November 11, 1918, the day of the armistice of World War I, it was forbidden to speak French in Alsace and in the department of the Moselle. If you spoke French, you went to prison. So when I was born, a year and a half after the end of World War I, my parents had no time yet to learn French. They spoke German, and they spoke a very good Hochdeutsch, a real good German. And that's what I learned with my parents, but at the same time, my elder sisters and brothers were already in school learning French. So among siblings, we spoke only French. We never spoke German. But I learned how to speak German. And in school, I learned German for 5 years. So I spoke, read, and wrote German as fluently as French, which explains why I was able to do the job I did later in Germany. So,
Second error is your sister.
yeah, what?
The second error.
Yeah, the second error, I have to tell you first that my husband is my prompter and put me back on track when I'm off track. So,
Second error.
yeah, the second error, which is much more important, is that my sister Stephanie was not arrested by the French police. That is absolutely not true. In my book, I wrote that she was arrested by the Gestapo. The Gestapo was the best-known police unit serving the German army and the German government. And when they come to your home to arrest somebody, they don't tell you to what police unit they belong. So we thought it was the Gestapo. But years later, I did some research for Yad Vashem, the museum in Jerusalem in Israel. And I found out that my sister had been arrested by the SIPO, S-I-P-O. They're just initials of a very long word. If you know German, you know that the German love to take one word, add a word, and another word, and make a very long word. But
The Zippo was found.
yeah, the SIPO was founded by a decree signed by Hitler in March 1942. My sister was arrested June 17, 1942, to show you how efficacious the German army was. The decree is signed in March 42, and on June 1742, they are already in all European countries occupied by the German army and arresting people. And they probably arrested people much before they arrested my sister. My sister was arrested for resistance act. She and we had helped hundreds of people to escape from occupied France into non-occupied France. It was extremely important for some people to be able to escape to non-occupied France. They were American and English pilots who had been shot down over occupied France and needed to get out as fast as they could because they didn't speak any French and would have been immediately noticed by the German army and would have, God knows what would have happened to them. So they needed to get out. They were the French prisoners of war who had escaped and needed to get out of occupied France to non-occupied France because the German would have checked their papers and found that they were prisoners, escaped prisoners of war, and would have been sent back to the camps in Germany and very heavily punished for having escaped. And the Jews, of course, and all the pariahs, all the people that the Germans couldn't tolerate, had to escape. And we helped these people who rang our bell. We didn't know who they were, we didn't know from where they were coming, but they needed help. And we sent them to a farmer in Dienay, another town an hour from Poitiers, where a farmer, Mr. Noël de Goux, had a farm which was partially in occupied France and partially in non-occupied France. You have to know that the line of demarcation between occupied and non-occupied France was not a straight line, it was a zigzag line. So his property was partially in one sector and partially in the other. So once on his property, it was very easy to go from one sector to the other. And Mr. de Goux was extremely clever, and he had saved thousands of people by letting them escape in his property. But the Germans, and mostly the Zippo, had suspicions, but they have no evidence, because I told you Mr. de Goux was extremely clever in the way he was doing it. But my sister made an enormous error. She sent him a letter because there were no postal communication between occupied and non-occupied France at that time. So she couldn't write directly to non-occupied France. So she sent that letter to Mr. de Goux with a voucher of cigarettes that a young man who had crossed on the property of Mr. de Goux and was in non-occupied France now, but he had forgotten that voucher of cigarettes in our home. If you had a voucher of cigarettes and you smoked, you needed to buy cigarettes or tobacco. But if you didn't smoke, you bartered it against food, because food was already very scarce in France at that time, because the Germans were stealing everything we had. So in that letter, my sister made an enormous error. She signed her real name. And the Zippo found her immediately and came to my house, to our home, and arrested her at dinner time and took her away. They questioned her, and she refused to give any answer, because any answer she would have given would have been a denunciation of Mr. de Goux. So 2 hours later, they came back to the house and arrested my father to put pressure on my sister to give them the information. But even in the presence of my father, she refused to give any information. So she was kept. My father was released immediately because at that time, in March 1942, the Germans in Poitiers had not yet started to arrest French Jews. They had arrested only foreign Jews. And you know, by your own experience right now, it's an extremely important issue. Anytime economical or political questions arise, the foreigners are always the first target. That was then, and it is now. So my father was home, but my sister was in prison for 1 month, and she celebrated her 21st birthday on July 10th, 1942 in prison. After that month, she was transferred to a camp on the fringes of the city of Poitiers, where we lived. And the camp was called the Camp of the Route of Limoges. Limoges is a city south of Poitiers. That camp is on Google. You can find it if you are interested to know about it. So, in the camp, my sister was a medical student, started to give medical care to the children in the camp who had received no medical care until then. Her tools were very poor, but it was better than nothing. And when we, the family, organized that she escapes, we had found 2 French guardians who accepted to help her escape. She refused because she felt that what she was doing for the children was too important. In prison, we could not visit her, but in the camp, 1 person of the family could see her 1 time a week. So 1 week, I went to see her, and I reminded her that her mother needed her as much as the children. And she answered me, "Don't you realize that if I escape, you are all going to be arrested?" I had never thought about that. So on my way back to the home, I had a very long walk. I decided that all members of my family were still in Poitiers. We were going to escape into non-occupied France so that she can escape too. And we were able to do it. We were successful. I cannot tell you the story, which is the most beautiful human story I know, how we escaped and who helped us. But you have to read my book to read the story. So
Sister was transferred.
yeah, so after we escaped, my sister was transferred to Drancy, a camp near Paris, which was a horrendous camp, and later to Pithiviers, which was not better. And from Pithiviers, she was deported on September 21st, 1942, the day of Yom Kippur, which is the highest Jewish holiday of the year, like Christmas for the Christians. And in her last letter, as I told you before, we were already in non-occupied France, and there was no postal communication between the two sectors. So she wrote to a friend in Poitiers, and in the postscriptum she added, "At the last rumors, we are leaving from Metz to work, so no need to dramatize." These are the last words she ever wrote, because years later, we found out that she had been deported to Auschwitz and she never came back. So I like to honor my sister before I talk about my own story. But before I go to my own story, I have another subject which is very dear to my heart, on which I will elaborate as briefly as possible. 75% of Jews in France survived. There is only one other country occupied by the German army where more Jews survived. That was Denmark. But the Danish fishermen took 95% of the Jews of Denmark and by boat to Sweden, which was a neutral country, and they all survived. And the fishermen did that. The Danish fishermen did that at the risk of their lives and the life of every member of his family. Don't ever forget that. And they did it. And in France, in Denmark, which is a very small country and very flat, they could not have hidden the Jews. It was impossible. That's why they took them to Sweden. But in France, it was different. We had huge mountains and a lot of mountains. We had beaches. We had a lot of rural spaces, and thousands of Jews were hidden. In some communities, every person in that community, every family in that community had at least one Jew hidden. And all these Jews survived, and nobody ever denounced anybody. The mayors of these cities and villages wrote forged papers for all the Jews, and the children were able to go to school and be instructed in French during the war. These are called the hidden children. So, and not only that, but we all, the ones who survived, the 75% of Jews who survived in France survived because non-Jews helped us. And for 5 years, you had to be helped by many people. So you can understand how many French people resisted the Germans and hid other human beings to save them.
Give a personal example.
Thank you. Which is the
Personal one of Monsieur of the false papers.
yeah. Okay, I give you an example. Several weeks before my sister was arrested, I met in the main street of Poitiers, Rue Gambetta, Mr. Charpentier, with whom I had worked in the French City Hall of Poitiers. Mr. Charpentier stopped me, took me to a very quiet place in the street, and told me, I am now in measure to provide you with identity papers for you, all members of your family without the stem Jew. With the stem Jew, you couldn't go to any public space. You couldn't go to a train station, you couldn't go to a post office, you couldn't go to a public park, you couldn't go swimming in the river of Poitiers, you couldn't go to a movie house, you couldn't go anywhere. And you couldn't go in stores until 4:30 in the afternoon, and you had only a window of 1 hour to do all your shopping. And at that time, there were no supermarket. There were only mom and pop shops, and each shop had a specialty. So you had to go from shop to shop to buy all your food. And all the owners of these shops told us, do not worry. We know what you are used to buy for your family. Come at 4:30. We will put everything aside, because the Germans thought that by 4:30 they wouldn't have any food anymore. So these people told us, we will put things aside. Come at 4:30, and then you can go to the next store to buy the rest. And all the owners did that. And they did that at the risk of their life and of every member of their family. So, you know, in Europe and in America, I don't know about Canada, I haven't lived here long enough to know, people believe that in France, the resistance was not very strong. That's absolutely not true. The resistance took many aspects. It was not just going in the street and kill a German. That was very rare. But it was to, all these aspects were resistance. And all the people who risked their life to save other humans were resistance. How can you explain that if we have so little resistance, that so many thousands of men and women were or executed, tortured before or after, before, I'm sorry. And deported in concentration camps where many of them died and many came back. How could we have so many people arrested for resistance if we had so little resistance?
Go back to Monsieur Charpentier.
Yeah, okay. I go back to Mr. Charpentier, my husband reminds me. So, Mr. Charpentier, when he told me that he could provide his identity cards, I told him, you cannot do that. You risk your life and that of your wife and little boy. I had seen pictures when we worked together. And he answered me, if I didn't help you, I couldn't live with myself. And if I can save one family, at least I will have done something. And he asked me for the name of every member of my family, and we were very numerous. My parents, my grandmother, my mother's mother, my grandfather, who had been a rabbi in Metz, had died in April 1939 before the war started. And since then, my grandmother lived with us. And my two younger sisters, because my oldest sister was in Paris in 1940, and my two brothers, the oldest was a prisoner of, an escaped prisoner of war from the Germans, and he was able to join us, and he never was arrested by, as a prisoner of war. And my second brother, who had been in the French army in Tunisia and had been sent home, the two young men were in unoccupied France, because at that time we were still extremely naive. We thought that only the young Jewish men were in danger. We had not yet understood at all what the Germans had in mind.
Monsieur Charpentier.
So, Mr. Charpentier, when I told him that, I asked him, when he told me that he had to do it, he felt that he had to do it and he wanted to do it, I asked him how much it would cost. He started crying. I was 21 years old. I had never made a man cry yet, so I was very embarrassed. So, and he told me, I do not want any money. I want to provide this card to save you. And he provided me with these cards. And I hid them because I had already understood that less people know what's going on, it was safer. So I didn't even tell my parents about it. But walking from the camp to the home, when I decided we were going to escape, I knew we could do it because I had these cards without the stamp Jew. I forgot to name one more person in our family. We had, since 1938, a little cousin from Germany, from Düsseldorf, Jackie Ferber, who my oldest brother and my oldest sister got out of Germany the day after Kristallnacht in 1938. And Jackie lived with us during the whole war and survived. And he's now in Israel, where he's a professional engineer, professor of engineering in a university in Israel. He's very successful as a professional. He's married and has 9 grandchildren, 3 children and 9 grandchildren.
Go to your story now. You finished your
Yeah.
study.
Yeah.
Marseille. Go to Marseille.
Yeah, okay. So you see that he was very successful. So now I'm going to my own story. We were now in non-occupied France. I finally was able to finish my studies of nursing that I had started in Poitiers for 1 year. I needed another year, and it was very difficult because it was forbidden for Jews to be in school. But I went to see the regional director of the Red Cross in Marseille, of whom I had heard very good things. And I told her right away, I am Jewish and I would like to finish my studies that started in Poitiers. Can you help me? And she told me right away, I don't see why you couldn't finish your schooling. There is no reason for it. And she called the Red Cross School of Nursing in Marseille and told them that they had to accept me. It was forbidden for Jews to be in school. But Poitiers had accepted me, and now, when I arrived in the school in Marseille, they told me right away, we cannot accept you, we do not want Jews here, and do not go back to Mrs. Keller, the regional director of the Red Cross. I left and I went immediately back to Mrs. Keller. And I told her what had happened. So she went on the phone and told them, if you don't accept her and keep her without making her life miserable, I will fire you. So she sent me back. So they had to accept me, and they made my life miserable. But with time, things got better. So, and I finished my studies, and I was able, once I was a registered nurse in France, I decided to go back to Paris to live with my sister. In Marseille, I was all alone. So I took a train, and I could do that because I had an identity card forged by Mr. Charpentier without the stamp Jew. In Paris, I worked for an agency. I could not work for a hospital where they would have asked me too many questions, but an agency placed me in families who needed a nurse and asked me no questions. So I was able to make a living. It was forbidden for Jews to make a living by the Germans. But at that time, thousands of people died of starvation because they had no money saved and couldn't make a living. So they died in the streets. And I was able to make a living, and I worked in Paris, and then Paris was liberated in August 1944. After the liberation of Paris, I tried to join the army. It was not possible immediately. First, there was a huge column, and it took several days for me to join a person to talk to. And when I arrived at that person, who was a woman, she asked me immediately what for my identity card. So I presented my card forged by Mr. Charpentier. She looked at it and said to me immediately, "It's a forged card. The army cannot accept it." She must have worked for the resistance in forged papers, because nobody else had any doubt that the card was not valid. But she noted that immediately. So she asked me for my birth certificate. Paris was liberated in August 1944, but my hometown of Metz was liberated only in November 1944, so I couldn't get my card. Remember that my hometown was occupied by the German army, and until we were able to get them out of France, much later, in November. So, and the third point, she asked me to prove that I had not collaborated with the German army. Everybody who wanted to join the army had to prove that. How do you prove that you have not done something that you haven't done yet? It's impossible. So I couldn't prove it. So it took me several months to be able to join the army. After Poitiers was liberated, I took the first train which functioned between Paris and Poitiers and went to visit the mother of my fiancé you saw in the DVD. She was all alone and very ill. Her two children, my fiancé Jacques, who was a medical student, and his younger brother Marc, who was a law student, had been both executed by the German on October 6, 1943, at Mont Valérien in Paris, the worst prison in Paris at that time. And her husband, who had been a big resistant too, was in the concentration camp of Buchenwald in Germany. So she was all alone and very ill. I took her to Paris with me, and she lived with my sister and myself, and we provided her the medical care she so badly needed. And when she was better, I took her to the cemetery in Ivry, I-V-R-Y, a suburb of Paris, where all the executed by the Germans were buried in a special sector, without names, numbers, without anything. But the manager, the French manager of the cemetery, had explained to me how to find their tombs. So I took the mother to their tombs, and it was a day where the President of France, General de Gaulle, was coming to talk to the parents of all the executed. And President de Gaulle arrived and saluted and left. He was an excellent general, but he had very poor social manners. But his entourage, he had an enormous entourage of chiefs of the resistance, many chiefs of the resistance, and chief of the army, talked to Mrs. Delaunay, to the mother of my fiancé, and asked her how they could help her. I was standing next to her, and she said to them, Miss Hoffnung, Mademoiselle Hoffnung, would like to join the army, but she has not the right documents. Can you help her? And in a few days, it was all solved. I was now assigned to the 151 Regiment of Infantry, which was in Alsace, where the front was. You remember, Alsace is where I was not born. So I was told to go to a certain place in Paris where I could find a bus taking me to the front. I went there and I found the bus, and I was the only woman in that bus. The others were officers, non-commissioned officers, and soldiers who had come to Paris on furlough and were going back to the front. And we left, and it took us very long to get to Alsace because the bus was a rickety old bus and needed repairs constantly. And we had another problem. We had no gasoline. Before 1939, France was a very rich country, but in 1944, France, the government of France was completely bankrupted. Our first French army was quasi-independent strategically, but depended completely upon all its resources on the American army. We were in the same sector in Alsace as the 3rd and 6th American armies. But the American army between Paris and Alsace did not know anything about this agreement. So when our two of our officers went to this office, they always took me along because they thought it would help. It didn't help at all. And they asked for gasoline. And the Americans looked at them and said, the French army, no way. So we had only one option to be able to get to the front. The officers stole the gasoline from non-attended jeeps stopped along the roads. And I was a lookout. I was a girl, so I was a lookout. So I was an accomplice. So that's how we were able to get to the front. And when we arrived at the front, I was the only newcomer in that bus. So I was immediately debriefed. That means interviewed by an officer of intelligence. In every regiment of every army in the world, there is at least one officer of intelligence. So that officer immediately asked me what I did during the resistance. And I told him that I had, that my sister Stephanie and I, we had saved so many people by sending them to Mr. Degout, and from where they were able to cross into non-occupied France, and that my sister was deported. We had still no news from her. And after that, I did things on my own, but that I was never able to join a group of resistance. Several times I had been interviewed by chiefs of the resistance in the attic of very big buildings in Paris, in Marseille and Paris. It was in the attics of these buildings because it was ultra secret. But every time the chiefs of the resistance looked at me, I was 4'11". I shrunk a lot now, like all elderly people, but I was 4'11". I was very thin. I was blonde with blue eyes and a light skin. The chiefs of the resistance just decided, by looking at me, that I had absolutely no substance. They took me for a bimbo. And they slapped me on the head and said, "Little girl, go back to your mother." So I told that to the captain, and he said to me, "That's a lot of baloney. I'm sorry, Rabbi, to use such a word." But that's what he said. But
You should have gone out and
yeah, you should have gone out in the streets and killed a German. And I answered him, I am a nurse. I treat people. I do not kill anybody, not even the Germans who I hate. And he answered me, you see, you are not fit to be in the army. And he too wanted to send me back to my mother. I said, no. I had enough trouble coming here. The headquarters of Paris sent me. I'm going to stay. So furious by my attitude, he told me, as a registered nurse, you should be an officer. But because you were such a coward during the resistance, I make you sergeant. And I just shrugged my shoulders because I couldn't care less what grade he was giving me. So more furious by my attitude, he told me, I do not need nurses. I have enough nurses. You are going to be a social worker. All my training had been in nursing. I had not the smallest concept of what social work entailed. But in the army, and that counts for all armies in the world, if they tell you you are a social worker, that's what you are. So I left his office and I went to in the town to one of the homes because all the troops who were not on the front had a room in the town. And I slept all night. The next morning I got up and put on the American uniform I was given. As I told you before, all our resources came from the 3rd and 6th American Army, uniform included, food included, everything. So that uniform was much too big, but it was very warm, and that was very important because the winter of 1944, 1945 was unusually cold, and it was near the Vosges Mountains where it was even colder. So I wonder what I should do, because nobody gave me any order or told me what they expected me to do as a social worker. So I decided to go visit our troops at the front. I inquired, I left the town in a certain direction, crossed a small forest, and on the other side of the forest was a canal. There are lots of canals in Germany, in Alsace. And our troops were on the western side of the canal. The Germans had retreated on the eastern side several days earlier. The canal was quite narrow, like most man-made canals. And I entered the foxholes of our troops. They were very surprised because they had never seen a social worker in their foxholes. And I asked them what they needed. And they requested mostly underwear, hats, scarves, socks, food, writing and reading material, and blankets. That's very important. So I went back to the town, and the Alsatians were extremely generous and gave me a lot of things for our troop. I did that for about 3 weeks. And one day, crossing the square of the village, of the town, at lunchtime, I met the colonel of the regiment. I had never met him before. In 1943, we all heard in France that a resistant of, we did not know his name, that was ultra secret, but a resistant had killed the first German in France on the metro station Barbès-Rochechouart in Paris. But we did not know the name of the resistant, which was ultra secret. But when I joined that regiment, I very quickly learned that the colonel of that regiment was a resistant who had killed the first German in France. So he stopped me, Colonel Fabien stopped me and asked me to answer his phone during his lunch break. I went with him to his office, he showed me around and leaving. He was very good looking, which doesn't hurt anything. And he was very courteous. And he told me, I am sorry, I have nothing for you to read here. There are only German books. Do you remember I told you that in Alsace and in the department of the Moselle, it was forbidden to speak French until November 11, 1918. So that's why, and now again, during this war, the German had again annexed the all of Alsace and the department of Moselle, where it was again forbidden to speak French. That's why there were only German books in that home. So I answered him, that's quite all right. I read German fluently. So extremely interested. He walked back towards me and asked me if I spoke German. And I told him yes, as well as French. Then he explained to me that in Germany, all males from the age of 12 to old age are in the army in uniform. So any man in civilian clothes in the streets of Germany would be noticed and arrested. That's why they needed women. And he asked me if I accepted to be transferred to the intelligence service of the First French Army to which we belonged. And I accepted. He left, and I sat on a chair and wondered in what predicament I had put myself, but it was too late. 2-3 days later, 2 officers came to pick me up and took me to Mulhouse, another city in Alsace. And later we went to Colmar, another city in Alsace, where I underwent an extremely intensive training for several weeks. And after the training was terminated, I was asked to create my own alibi, which would stick much better than an alibi given to me. So I created my alibi, presented it, it was accepted. After that, I was assigned to the Commandos of Africa, one regiment of the First French Army. And the chief of that regiment was Colonel Bouvet. You heard his name in the DVD. Colonel Bouvet asked me first to interrogate German prisoners of war to learn the plan of retreat of the Germans from Alsace to Germany. You must understand that all armies in the world have as well a plan of retreat as a plan of attack, because you never know how things will turn out. So you have to know too that, or remember that in winter of 1944, the Germans had counterattacked in Belgium, and that was an extremely powerful counterattack, which was so powerful that they almost won the war at that time. But luckily, finally, the Allied armies were able to stop that counterattack just before Christmas of 1944. Now we were in February 1945. The Germans were counterattacking again, coming through Strasbourg, and all the Allied armies, which were on the front, had to retreat west more into France, and I was one of them. And until that counterattack was finally stopped, the Germans, that was the last chance of the Germans to prevent the Allied armies, the growth of the Allied armies to invade Germany. So
You interrogated.
that's why it was very important for the Allied army to know what was the plan of retreat of the Germans from Alsace to Germany. I interrogated generals and colonels, the German prisoners of war, who, because the subaltern wouldn't have known anything about the plan of retreat. And I obtained important information, and I can boast about it because it's written in the citation of one of the medals on that table, that I provided Colonel Bouvet of very important information on the plan of retreat of the German from Alsace to Germany. That was my first achievement in the army. After that, Colonel Bouvet asked me to cross the front in Alsace, not yet going into Germany, but to cross the front in Alsace. And 13 times I tried to cross the front in Alsace, and 13 times I was unsuccessful. There were many reasons. During the war, things are very fluid, they change very fast. I was told several times to go to a certain point into an Alsace place where I would find certain things. But when I arrived, I couldn't find them, so I couldn't proceed. Another reason, we had military guides who knew the region extremely well and explained to me exactly how to go from A to B and what I will find on the ground and how to proceed on the ground. But they are humans and they make mistakes. And 2 times that happened. So I will give you an example. One night, because I was always taken very late at night, it was midnight, I was taken in the jeep by 2 officers to a certain place in Alsace. So the jeep stopped, we got out of the jeep, and the officers explained to me that I had to cross the huge field covered with snow in front of us and find a town northwest of that field where I will meet a group of German military who were going to retreat in Alsace, not yet in Germany, to mix with them, go with them, and send as much information I could. I had only a little suitcase with a change of clothes. I had taken all the labels off so that nobody could tell they came from France. But I had no arm. I had no radio. You have to be 2 to have a radio. You cannot have one if you're alone. I had no compass. No compass. I had no arm.
No map.
No map. I had nothing in writing. Everything I needed to know was in my memory. So I left his officers and started walking on that field. I had not even a flashlight. And it was a very, very dark and cold night of February 1945. So I walked on that field covered with snow, and suddenly I heard a huge crack, and here I felt myself completely submerged in the ice-cold water of a canal. The military guide had forgotten to tell me that there was a canal in that field. So you see, that's what happened when you are humans doing things. And I popped up and tried to grasp the edge, the cement edge of the canal, which was narrow like most man-made canals. And I couldn't do it because everything was so frozen that I could not grasp sufficiently I was now much heavier because I was drenched in that ice cold water from head to toe, which made me much heavier. It took me a very long time to find a place where I could grasp sufficiently to get out of the canal. And I walked all night, by that very cold night, drenched in ice cold water, and I never caught a cold, to show you how stress can protect you. And at daybreak, I noticed the prints of my shoes showed that I had walked in circle all night. And years later, I read in a magazine that if you are lost by a very dark night without compass or other marks, you are going to walk in circle. And that explained to me why I had done that very weird thing that I never understood. But after that, the captain who directed our small group of intelligence decided that I was going to go into Germany by crossing the border of Switzerland into Germany. Switzerland was a neutral country, but the Swiss had helped the Germans as long as the Germans were successful. Now we were successful, they were helping us. That's neutrality. So
You were taken to Basel.
Yeah. So I was taken by one of our officers to Basel, where I met again. I had met him before, Colonel Reiner, a fictitious name, who was the director of the intelligence of the Swiss customs in Basel. And Colonel Reiner accepted that I crossed into Germany from Switzerland. And he called an agent, Mr. Lemaire, another fictitious name, to take me to the border between Switzerland and Germany. Mr. Lemaire took me by car to Schaffhausen, which is another city in Switzerland. But Schaffhausen was very close to the city of Singen, S-I-N-G-E-N, in Germany, the first city where I was supposed to go. So he stopped the car near a forest, and Mr. Lemaire and I, we crossed a little forest, and on the other side of the forest, he showed me a huge field. There are lots of fields in my story. I bordered this time on the northern edge by a small country road. Now, the forest and the field were Switzerland, but the road was Germany. The country road was Germany. And there was the width of that field had no barrier whatsoever. And you can walk from the field onto the road without problem. But the road was under the surveillance of 2 sentinels, German military sentinels, heavily armed, who came, one from the eastern edge of the width of the field, walked to the center of the width of the field. The other sentinel came from the west, met him. They talked 2-3 seconds, turned their back, and walked to the edge of the field. And they were doing that constantly, night and day. So Mr. Lemaire told me, towards evening, you are going, when both sentinels had met and separated and turned their back to you, walking to the edges of the width of the field, you are going to crawl along the field and hide behind the bushes near the road. And when they come back and separate again, turning them back to you, you go on the road, you walk towards the east, towards the right, towards Singen, which was very close, only 2 kilometers. So Mr. Lemaire and I, we spent all afternoon in that little forest. He was a middle-aged man. I was 24 years old. And he talked to me about his wife and children and a lot of other things. But in the afternoon, with a very strange smile, he said to me, "You may be killed tonight, so why don't we have a good time now?" But that was not on my agenda. So after that, we talked about other things, and towards evening, but it was still very light, he told me, "Now is the moment." I took my little suitcase, still with clothes of which I had taken all the labels off, like I told you before, and I had again no compass, no arm, no map, no radio, nothing in writing. But I had 2 new things in my suitcase. I had vouchers which had been given to me by my intelligence service the day before I left. But nobody could tell me how to use these vouchers. You cannot go to an office and just present a voucher. You had to know how to proceed. But nobody could tell me because we had very little information of what was going on in Germany. And that's why I was sent to Germany for 2 reasons. For military information, of course, but also information how the civilians were reacting to the war and behaving, which was extremely important for the Allied armies when they were going to invade Germany. So,
Also had German money.
yeah, I had a lot of German money hidden in my suitcase. So when Mr. Lemaire told me that's the moment, I crawled and hid behind the bushes. Everything was perfect. But once I lay down behind these bushes, seeing the German soldiers, the sentinels, come and go, I became so terrified because I realized the holes in my alibi. I didn't know how to use the vouchers, which was extremely important, and I remembered that I had forgotten to ask, and my handlers had forgotten to tell me the name of the clinic where I was supposed to work in Constance. So I became extremely terrified. I was paralyzed, completely paralyzed by fear. And it took me an extremely long time, several hours, to overcome that fear. But suddenly I remembered something. Something clicked in my brain. And what I remembered made me get up, take my little suitcase, walk on the road when the 2 soldiers were turning their back to me, and I walked towards the sentinel who was coming back from the eastern edge of the width of the field. I lifted my right arm, Heil Hitler, and he asked me for my identity card. I was now called Marthe Ulrich, and I told you I had a complete alibi. So when I gave him my card, I wondered if he too would realize that it was a card forged by my intelligence service. But he gave it back to me without questioning. I was now in Germany. Rabbi and the audience, I ask you, all of you, are you willing to listen about 15, 20 minutes more of my talk? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So after I left that Sentinel, I walked towards the city of Singen, which was very close, I told you, 2 kilometers. And there were craters on the road because Singen had been a very industrial city working for the German army and had been bombarded by the American aviation. So I fell in these craters, but then it had become dark already, and I arrived in Singen, and it was absolutely dark because it was a war, there were absolutely no lights. But I saw near a well 2 men who sometimes switched on a flashlight, and with armbands when they switched on the flashlights. And I understood there was the security. So I walked toward them and I coughed to make sure they're not surprised and don't shoot me. And they were very helpful. They told me exactly where the address was. Like I told you before, everything I needed to know was in my memory. I had nothing in writing. So I went to that home, which was very close. I went up 2 flights and rang a bell. A young woman in a nightgown and a robe, it was late at night, opened the door, and I told her who sent me. I cannot tell you who sent me, you have to read my book. And when I told her that, she became very hospitable and invited me in, gave me something to eat, I hadn't eaten since lunch, and gave me a room. The next morning I got up and went into the kitchen where she was already cooking. And I noticed right away that she was in very, very bad mood. And she looked at me and said, I did not sleep all night. I noticed that your stockings were completely torn. And we are constantly warned that we are so close to the border of Switzerland and that spies are crawling in from Switzerland. And when I saw you torn stockings, I wondered. And then she looked me straight in my eyes and said, Fräulein, which means young lady, are you a spy? And I started laughing. Don't ask me how I had that reaction, I don't know. I started laughing, I was standing, and I bent a little over, stretched out my arms and said, do I look like a spy? And she started laughing too and said no, and we became extremely friendly. And when I left Singen for Freiburg by train, she came with me to the station. I had helped her very much with her little boy, and her husband was in the German army and she had no news. And I had a fiancé that was part of my alibi. I had a fiancé, supposedly, who was a German prisoner of war in a French prison of war, who I said, I didn't know, I had no news, I didn't know where he was, I was looking for him. So we had so much in common that we became very friendly. And she came with me to the station, and she took care of the voucher without me asking her. She just took care of it. And she saved my life because that's how I learned how to use the vouchers. So,
Took the train.
so I took that train, and I never took another train because every few minutes the German military police, which were huge guys, they had to be at least 6 feet to be in the German military police. And they looked like football players. And they came and checked our papers every few minutes. And every time they looked at my card, I was worried if they were going to discover that it was a forged card. So I never took another train. I walked a lot in Germany. So in Freiburg, I was watching to discover how the Germans were living because we had so little information. And I noticed that transportation was completely disrupted in daytime. No train, no buses, no military car functioned in daytime, only at night, because of the bombardments of the American and English aviation. And in daytime, if they wanted to go somewhere, they had to walk. And the Germans always walked in groups. They didn't like to be individual. So I joined a group going in the direction I wanted to go. And in that group was that SS you saw named in the DVD. That SS immediately told us that he came from the Eastern Front, that he had been wounded and came from a hospital, that he was now assigned to the Siegfried Line, of which an entrance was on the way of where we were going. And as we walked, and I walked next to him, he told us that he smelled the Jew a mile away. But that morning he had a very poor smell. And as we walked, he told us all the atrocities the SS and the Wehrmacht had committed on the Eastern Front. They had committed atrocities on the Western Front and in France too, but it was nothing compared to what was going on the Eastern Front. It was 1,000 times worse. And as we walked at a good pace, and it was a little warm, that SS suddenly fainted. I was a German nurse. I took care of him. And when he regained consciousness, he was so grateful that I had taken care of him that he invited me to come and visit him at the Siegfried Line, and he gave me his phone number. For 3 weeks, I did not go to the Siegfried Line. I had other things to do. But 3 weeks later, I came back to Freiburg, and I heard on the German radio that the Allied armies were very close and were going to invade Freiburg. So I decided to go to see my friend, the SS. And I went to the Siegfried Line walking. I had no other way of transport. So I arrived at the Siegfried Line, and I discovered that the Siegfried line had been completely evacuated. The last stragglers were leaving, and they told me they're all gone. Nobody's here anymore. So I asked several stragglers walking independently to make sure that I had the right information. When it was confirmed that the Siegfried line was completely evacuated, I walked back to Freiburg as fast as I could. I had understood immediately that if our Allied armies had not to fight the Siegfried line, which was an atrocious project, we could much quicker invade the south of Germany and terminate the war. So I walked back to Freiburg as fast as I could. And when I arrived in Freiburg, all the inhabitants had heard on the German radio the same thing as I did, that the town, the city was going to be invaded by foreign armies and were going to their home and locked themselves in their apartment. They were terrified by that thought. And I was all alone in the center of Freiburg. I went to the main artery and I waited. And the first tank arrived and rode towards me. How I was going to tell, to make understand the people on that tank that I was a friend and not an enemy. I had no document, nothing to prove who I was. So I went in the middle of this avenue and I raised my right arm, I cannot do it anymore, as high as I could. And I made the victory sign, the V sign of Winston Churchill. We all knew at that time that Winston Churchill was very seldom photographed during the war without making the victory sign, the V sign, with his two fingers. So I did that. And the tank rode towards me, and as I am extremely, extremely lucky in my life, the tank did not kill me but stopped. And I asked the officer in charge to come down. I was quite assertive, I must say, and he came down. And I told him to take me immediately to headquarters because I had important information. And here again, I was so lucky because it was a French army which invaded Freiburg. You can all Google it and see that I do not lie you. The French army invaded Freiburg, and I was so lucky because if an English-speaking army had invaded Freiburg, I don't know how I could have communicated with them because I didn't speak English yet. But with the French army, there was no problem. He took me in the tank and drove me to the headquarters, where I met Commander Petit of the 2nd Zouave, another regiment from North Africa. And Commander Petit immediately told me, who tells me that the truth, it may be a trap. So I just wrote a phone number on a piece of paper and told him to call it, because we had the same technology as the American Army. We could call any service on the field. So he called my service, who reassured him that he could trust me, and they were happy to know that I was still alive. Remember, I had no radio, so I couldn't communicate very often with them. So Commander Petit sent a patrol to the Siegfried line which came back hours later and said that's true, the Siegfried line is completely evacuated. I was a very important VIP that night at the French headquarters in Freiburg. I was invited for dinner. I was given a room, and the next morning at breakfast, Commander Petit asked me if I wanted to be driven back to my service. And I told him, oh no, my mission terminates the day of the armistice. I have this morning to cross the front south of Freiburg again and go south. But I asked him for a huge, huge service. I asked him for a bicycle because I was tired of walking. So he gave me a bicycle. And with that bicycle, I crossed the front without any problem. And riding down from a huge summit, there are big mountains in the south of Germany. I saw stop along the road a group of German military ambulances. And the colonel was a physician too, I could tell by his uniform, and his entourage were all standing near the ambulances. So if you are part of the intelligence service and you see something unusual, you stop to inquire what's going on. The colonel told me that that night they're going to go into Switzerland, which was very close, and from there to Austria to prevent becoming prisoners of war. And then he asked me from where I was coming. And I told him that that morning I had escaped from Freiburg because I was terrified by the French army, which had Moroccan, Algerian, Tunisian, and black soldiers, which was absolutely the truth. Our army had this type of soldiers, but we still had colonies in North Africa and Africa at that time. So if you understand and remember how racist the Germans were, then you can imagine the reaction to what I was telling them. For them, I was the perfect, the model of a German patriot. So the colonel, and I complained too, that our German army was not defending us anymore as much as they should. So after a while, the colonel said to me, don't be so afraid. The war is not terminated. And he told me exactly the location of the remnant of the German army hidden in ambush in the Black Forest. And that information I was able to get to my service by writing a letter that I did not even code because that would have taken hours, and that major information needed to be in their hands as fast as possible. So I wrote a letter in French and put that letter in my left pocket with my hand on it to protect it, big protection. And I went myself into Switzerland because Colonel Reinhardt in Basel had told me before I left, if ever you have a problem, go into Switzerland, but tell the Swiss customer that you are Swiss agent, not French. So I went into Switzerland, and after many adventures, I found the customer, and I gave him my letter, and he transferred it that same morning to Colonel Reinhardt, who read it because he too wanted to know what was going on. It was in French, it was not coded, and then he transferred it to my service. And that's why I got all these medals. Thank you very much. Do you have questions? Do you know? Oh, okay.
Well, what were you guys doing when you were 24 years old? Thank you so much for sharing your story with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
I've received word that the book's sold out now, but I believe you could probably purchase it online if you're interested. Also, Marthe's husband, Major, who has been with her tonight. Her medals are up here on display, so if you're interested in coming to take a look after, he'll be here with them as well. That's amazing. I don't even know what to say. So I guess we have a few more minutes. We'll take a few moments. If you have, I imagine there's probably many questions that you have for Marthe about her experience. Like I said, there's when I was up here earlier, there's 4 stations throughout the hall. I'm going to take my privileged position up here, though, and maybe ask the first question. If you want, you can line up, and I'll try to moderate as best I can. But I'm just curious to know. I have heard you say before that you cannot just let other people do the work. You too have to be engaged, and one person can make a difference. So I'm just curious, in the spirit, what advice or suggestions would you offer us with regard to fighting back against rising anti-Semitism and hatred in general today?
What advice would you give to fighting anti-Semitism and to be engaged today?
I don't give advice to adults. Adults should know on their own what they should do. I give advice only to children.
All right,
Les questions, ça c'est pas bien. Ça c'est pas bien.
over here, number 5.
How'd they train you to become a spy?
How did they train you to become a spy?
How did they train you to become a spy?
Oh, I was trained to recognize everything of the German army, not the Navy or the Air Force, but the army. I had to recognize every button, every insignia, everything which was different on the uniforms, so that I can tell immediately to what type of the army they belonged to. And I had to learn how to code and to decode. I had learned how to read maps, which still helps me when my husband drive the car before we had the GPS. And I had to learn arms. I was taken to a forest and I was taught how to use all the arms, even the machine gun, which was so heavy. I had to learn all these things. I cannot remember more things right now, but I tell you, that was enough to keep me busy very, very night and day.
Thank you.
Oh, c'est bien.
Sorry, can you adjust your mic, please? Thank you.
Go that way. Good? Okay, there we go. Thank you. There is a television series called X Company where English people were trained to be spies and infiltrate the French to help train the resistance fighters. Did you ever come across any of the SOE operatives?
Did you ever come across English operatives?
No, absolutely not. I was only in the sector with American Army. I never met the English or Canadian Army because they were in different sectors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for honoring our city here in Saskatoon with your presence. My name is Hassan Masri. I'm a local physician here in Saskatoon, and I've always knew nurses are the best kind of people. Now I have one more reason to believe that nurses are the best kind of people. My question to you is, as a proud Muslim Canadian, looking at what's going on in the United States and Canada, and the rise of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia has risen by 300%. There was the attack on the synagogue in Pittsburgh, the attack on the mosque in Quebec. Why is history, listening to you, why is history repeating itself, and why have we not learned anything from everything that we heard from you?
Why is history repeating itself and anti-Semitism reoccurring? That's a very profound question.
It's a question which nobody has solved yet, and I am not the one who can solve it. But it's an extremely important question. But we are a small minority, a very small minority, and for some reason, the majority of people consider that we are all very bad or very good. But there is never an in-between opinion.
Thank you very much.
There are elements in every group. There are bad elements and good elements. But we are taken as a whole, as an entire element without distinction.
Thank
And
you.
how that happens, I cannot tell you. That is beyond the understanding of men, of the biggest thinker.
Thank you.
So I'm struck by the picture of you lying in the field in Switzerland with your suitcase, behind the bushes, watching the sentinels go back and forth. And you talked about being so frightened and so afraid and lying there for hours. So I'm wondering what the conversation was in your head, or how you calmed yourself down, what you said to yourself, reminded yourself of, that made you or helped you find the courage to move forward.
When you were lying, watching the soldiers going up and back, what gave you the courage to get up?
Oh, I'm very happy you asked that question because very few people ask that. Okay, I remember suddenly that in Alsace, when I was not successful 13 times to cross the front in Alsace, the captain who had organized all this mission, Captain
Mollard.
comment?
Mollard.
Mollard, yeah, Captain Mollard de Jourdan, he was a noble. He was an extremely good officer, but he could not accept that a mission that he had organized is not successful. So he pretended that I had done something to prevent to cross the border, the front, and that he didn't know what, but that I had done something. And I defended myself, and we had a big fight. And the colonel told me that I was absolutely right to defend myself, but he didn't worry about me not being able to defend myself. And Captain Mollard, every time I came back, said, "You see, I told you she has cold feet, she will never do it." So when I was lying there, incapable of moving, because I was so terrified, I suddenly remembered that. And I said, if I don't move now, Captain Mollard will be right. And that made me get up and walk.
Thank you so much. I think we might have time for one or two more questions. So,
All right, good evening. I'm a local history teacher here in Saskatoon, and I have rather a statement rather than a question. Thank you for the courage to tell the story that you tell, because it allows teachers, such as myself as a history teacher and many other teachers, to put a face to the stories that we tell our students. And I was very privileged to have read your book over the Christmas break, and I simply couldn't put it down. And when I teach my students about World War II and the Holocaust, you know, it's stories like yours and the courage of what you've done that have completely altered the course of history. So it's people like you that give people like me the tools to be successful and make education real in our classrooms. So thank you.
thank you.
What did your family think when they found out that you were a spy?
What did your family think when they found out that you were a spy?
What did your family think that they found out you were a spy? Tell your mother.
You know, after the armistice, I went back to Paris with Colonel Bouvet and a whole group for the parade in Paris along the Champs-Élysées. And we were not in the parade, but we were spectators. And after that, Colonel Bouvet gave me a jeep and a driver to go to see my family. I went first to Poitiers to see the parents of my fiancé, because the father had come back from Buchenwald and I wanted to meet him. So after that, I went to the mountains in the center of France, in the Cantal, Vic-sur-Serre, where my family was living. And when I arrived, I was in uniform because I was in the jeep. I couldn't drive if I was not in uniform. And on my uniform, I had one medal, so only one which was given to me at that time on the front, and that's a Croix de Guerre. That's a medal I cherish the most. And when my mother saw that, she was not a fool. She looked at me and said, "You didn't get that in a hospital." So I told her, no, I was in Germany all alone. She sat down and said, "Don't say more." And nobody asked me any questions of what I had done. And the ones who survived only knew what I had done after they read my book, like my husband, too. He really knew what I had done. He knew certain little fragments, but very little, just little events. But he didn't know the story. He read my book.
How are you guys? How are you doing, Marthe? Would you be up for answering one or two more questions? It's okay. All right. What at the very back over there?
Hi there. I just want to thank you for sharing your story. I just recently came back from Israel and got to see the Yad Vashem Museum, and it was a life-changing experience to see all the lives and the stories that happened. And I just believe that our people in Canada maybe are not aware of a lot of the stuff that happened. And first and foremost, I want to say so sorry that happened to your people. And I'm a very, very proud supporter of Israel. I'm very pro-Israel, and I believe by going there that the stories that was told there needs to be told here so that our young people can know that it'll never happen again. Never again. And I just want to know if during your time when you were going through what you went through, how your experience with your God. How did you call out to him? Like, what was your experience? Did it bring you closer to him? Because I believe your story has so much divine intervention, it's all over it. Thank you.
God has nothing to do with my experience. I don't believe that God is just watching me every minute I do things. But
did it bring you closer to God?
You know, that's a very difficult question to answer.
Thank you.
Well, we thank you for sharing it.
Thank you for sharing your story. I guess my question is actually in a similar vein. I had the opportunity of visiting Poland and going to Auschwitz and walking through the camp. And I guess my question to you would be, how do you respond when you hear people today who go as far as to deny that it even happened, or to downplay how bad it really was? Because life-changing, astounding, the opportunity to walk through there and know that every single step had seen so many lives ended in such a brutal fashion. So what advice, I guess, can you give to the rest of us to fight that ignorance? How best can we fight that?
I think to summarize, how best can we fight the ignorance of hatred, right?
Or even like specifically to Holocaust deniers. Like to me, it's lunacy, but how do you, if someone has closed their mind to it, how best do you overcome that?
How best do you maybe overcome Holocaust denial?
How do you overcome Holocaust denial, or people who Holocaust denial and people who have their minds set. How do you overcome people who deny that?
Oh, now it's, you know, people who deny the Holocaust, if I met them, I have never met anybody yet, but if I met them, I would say, why don't you give me my sister back? And that, if they can answer that without denying the Holocaust, then they have no mind whatsoever.
As a student of history, it's very easy in the classroom to overlook the humanity behind World War I, World War II, and some of the other major events in history. Whereas a story like yours really comes to show that there is humanity. This does affect millions of people. I don't really have a question, just wanted to comment.
Thank you.
That was a comment. History teaches humanity.
Yeah.
That's all.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to take a moment here before we finish our evening and again say thank you to Marthe, thank you Major, thank you for coming here tonight to share your story. I think every single Jewish person has experienced instances of anti-Semitism, of course not to this level of the Holocaust, but in minor aggressions, from name calling to physical assaults to even issues with organizing this event. And when it was made public, people had some people had some reactions to that. So it is still a hatred that exists and morphs and mutates in every generation. And that's why it's so important and so amazing and so wonderful that so many of you came out here tonight to hear Marthe's experience, to hear Marthe's story. And so many thanks to you. Thank you again. Again, just a reminder, if you would like to come and take a look at the medals, they're up here. And unfortunately, as I mentioned before, the books are sold out, but please take a look online. I'm sure you can find them there. Thanks again. Thank you for coming.